Hi there, I'm Chuck Todd, and welcome to another episode of Meet the Press Reports. It was among the most surprising comebacks in football of the 2021 season. After losing 7 of the first 8 contests, the Miami Dolphins won 8 of their last 9 games and almost made the playoffs. So what happened next was even more surprising. Brian Flores, the coach behind this resilient season, and one of only 2 black coaches in the NFL, and 3 years of success actually at Miami of overperforming, he was fired. And then in his search for a new coaching position that many thought would be a no-brainer, an interview that Flores called a sham led him to decide to sue the league and the Dolphins for discrimination. That lawsuit, later joined by other black coaches, has forced the country to ask an uncomfortable question about its most popular sport. Does football have a race problem? NBC News correspondent Blaine Alexander takes a deep dive into this issue.
Got it! Touchdown!
For decades, it's dominated our Sundays. The National Football League, a multi-billion-dollar industry with legions of fans, endless influence, week after week, leaving millions mesmerized by the action on the gridiron. But in recent years, there has been growing debate over a different kind of action on the sidelines.
Colin Kaepernick, 49ers quarterback, has refused to stand.
The kneeling, the protests, and the backlash.
Get that son of a bitch off the field right now. Out. He's fired.
All of it placing a growing spotlight on race in the nation's most profitable professional sports league. It's an issue that's even more glaring when focused on head coaches. Here are the numbers. In 2021, black players made up the vast majority of the National Football League, with more than 2/3 identifying as either African American or mixed race. Yet, among coaches, it's a much different story. Currently, there are only 3 black head coaches in the entire league. And throughout the league's nearly 102-year history, only 25 black men have ever held that position. Among them, Tony Dungy.
I think the basic question is, does the NFL have a race problem?
We do have a problem.
Tony Dungy is one of the most recognizable names in football. His NFL career spanned more than 3 decades, first as a defensive back with the Pittsburgh Steelers, then as a barrier-breaking coach. In 2006, he led the Indianapolis Colts to a Super Bowl victory, the first black coach to ever win it all.
You know, I'm struck that you can love the league, but also be critical of it.
Well, I think one thing I learned from Coach Noel is that good players know their weaknesses and they work on their weaknesses. When you've got an organization that is 65 to 70% African American on the field, but then you look in other portions of the business, the staffs, the coaching staffs, the front office, the support staffs, and it's not that. You have to question and say, well, what's going on here? Why is it this way on the field, but it's different off the field? And I think that's what the NFL has to face right now.
Dungy says he believes implicit bias plays a role, something he experienced firsthand during his early coaching interviews.
I don't think anybody was looking saying, I don't want a black coach, but you don't look like the coaches that I visualize. They have this perception of what the leader is going to be, and they don't necessarily think of who's playing and who is being led.
Dungy has more than once been right at the intersection of coaching and race. In 2002, he was fired as head coach from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, one of 2 black coaches terminated in the same year. At the time, the Bucs owner praised Dungy and called his firing a difficult decision, but the move outraged activists and attorneys alike, including a high-profile lawyer named Johnny Cochran. He and fellow attorney Cyrus Mary hired an expert to crunch the numbers and found while black coaches outperformed white coaches, they had inferior opportunities to hold those positions. That led to the league implementing what is now known as the Rooney Rule.
Do you believe that the rule was necessary at that time?
I do think it was necessary. Yeah. I don't think we did it properly, though. We only incorporated the one aspect, interview a minority candidate. So
it didn't go far enough.
It didn't go far enough.
The letter of the law says when there is a head coaching vacancy, teams have to interview at least 1 candidate of color. That number has since been upped to 2, and the rule since expanded to include general manager and coordinator positions. The intended goal, to give candidates of color a fair shot.
What happened in practice was, let me interview a minority candidate, make sure I get that out of the way, and then I'll do my search over here.
So you're saying it turned into kind of a checking the box type of thing?
I think in the later years it did.
It's the rule at the heart of a new lawsuit filed by Brian Flores. Recently fired as head coach of the Miami Dolphins, Flores took the extraordinary step of suing the league and several of its teams, claiming racial discrimination, saying the league denied him and others head coaching and other positions. 2 more black coaches recently joined that lawsuit. The NFL responded to the suit, saying diversity is core to everything we do, and that they plan to defend against these claims, which they said are without merit. Several NFL teams have also denied the allegations.
I think it's the equivalent of Colin Kaepernick taking a knee and kind of waking up the league to see what was there and not there.
Richard Lapchick runs Tides. For more than 30 years, his group has been grading professional sports leagues on their race and gender hiring practices. In 2021, the NFL received a B overall, but just a C+ for coaching hires.
I teach in a graduate program, and in graduate school, if you get anything below a B, it's considered an F. So when we give a C+, which is what they got for head coaches at 15.6%, that's actually, from my point of view, a failure.
So let's talk about how head coaches are hired. Typically, they come from a pool of coaches already within the league, offensive and defensive coordinators. But over the past decade, when hiring an offensive coordinator, nearly 90% of those positions went to white men, 107 versus just 12 to people of color. It's slightly better with defensive coordinator, 39 out of 100 going to people of color. But when hiring a head coach, it's the less diverse pool, offensive coordinator, that was significantly more likely to get that head coach position. Many of the league's current black coaches started out under Dungy.
I got the job in Tampa. I wanted to get some guys their first opportunity in the NFL. So Herm Edwards was on my first staff. Lovie Smith was on my first staff. Jim Caldwell came into the NFL. Into Tampa, Mike Tomlin. And
so you made it a priority to hire black coaches under you.
Black coaches who were not just black, but very, very good.
Sure. Yeah.
And if they got that opportunity to show what they could do, they could take it from there.
One of those coaches is Leslie Frazier. He was on Dungy's Super Bowl winning Colts staff and is currently defensive coordinator for the Buffalo Bills. He says the issue of race and coaching is a constant conversation within the league.
I get so many calls, so many guys asking me questions, what can change? How can we change it? What can we do? Leslie, how do you feel about it?
And these are people in the league who are calling you?
Other coaches in the league.
Fellow coaches, okay.
So
of all races or
of
just
all races?
In the last month, the NFL has taken steps, announcing a new diversity committee to evaluate hiring practices, then make recommendations to the league office and owners. We reached out to the NFL to request interviews with those committee members. The league said it's open to having members speak with us, just not at this time, saying the committee has not yet met as a group.
We had a really good session and an open discussion with owners, head coaches, and general managers today, in a very open dialogue about diversity. What I heard in that context was, and all of us share, is that there does need to be more interaction so that not only the owners but the general managers have more understanding of the candidates, what they've been through, who they are, what's made them a great coach.
But ultimately, there is one group of decision makers with each team, the owners. NFL teams rarely change hands and cost a lot of money. Some ownership is handed down through families. Across the league's 32 teams, there are currently only 2 owners of color, and there has never been a black owner in the NFL.
There has to be a massive change of heart with ownership in order for this to be rectified. Because at the end of the day, it's only the owners can change this. It's not the commissioner, it's not committees. It's the decision makers.
In a joint statement, the league's owners said that they are committed to increasing diversity among their ranks, writing, when considering potential ownership groups, membership will regard it as a positive and meaningful factor if the group includes diverse individuals who would have a significant equity stake in and involvement with the club.
My personal opinion, I think the players need to hold the league accountable.
Last year, Dungy wrote an open letter to owners saying it's crucial that they start hiring black coaches. He says that he received a number of responses from people across the league, but he says not one from a single owner.
You love the NFL. That's very clear. Do you realistically think that the league can and will make meaningful change?
I think we definitely can change. Will we make meaningful change? to me, that's still up in the air. I hope we do, and I think we need to, and I think we've got people in position to do that, but it's been a slow process. So to me, we've got to move faster.
Do you think the survival of the league depends on that change?
I think the league will survive no matter what, but I don't think it'll be as good as it can be if we don't make changes.
Blaine Alexander with that report. Former Cleveland Browns head coach Hugh Jackson has been outspoken about racial bias and problematic hiring practices within the NFL. Currently, he's the head coach at Grambling State University. Earlier this week, I spoke to Coach Jackson and began by asking him his thoughts on the Rooney Rule.
Well, when I was assistant head coach, I was very excited about it, Chuck, to be very honest with you, because I thought it kind of leveled the playing field, that minorities would get an opportunity to sit before the decision makers and have an opportunity to be in the big chair, be it head coach, be it offensive coordinator. So when I first heard exactly what they were trying to do, I was excited about it, but as I started to move forward, I got a little less excited about it because the fact that we had to implement a Rooney Rule told me all I needed to know.
And the implementation of it has been very, what I'd say, soft. There doesn't appear to be a penalty if it's discovered you violated, is there?
No, there's not a penalty. It's, it's really kind of swept under the carpet, in my opinion. But I think, Chuck, when you think about these things, how can you penalize anybody if it's not really something that's part of the Constitution and bylaws of the National Football League? So if it's not ratified within the league, if there's nothing that's going to hold you to a penalty, then I think that as ownership or front office executives, there's nothing that should come of this.
I want to play a small clip, Mike Mularkey, because I think, instead of hearing former coaches like yourself who are African-American saying this is what's happening to them, here's a white former head football coach who admits how the Rooney Rule was abused. Take a listen to Mike Mularkey in a podcast from a couple years ago.
And so I sat there knowing I was the head coach in 2016 as they went through this fake hiring process, knowing a lot of the coaches that they were interviewing, knowing how much they prepared to go through those interviews, knowing that everything they could do, and they had no chance of getting that job.
Do you think you were taken advantage of by the Rooney Rule?
I'm sure I was, but I probably didn't recognize it. You get so focused in trying to do everything you can to get the job. And then when you don't get the job, you're going back to your job. So at the time, I don't think you really look at it that way. It takes somebody like Mike Mularkey to really come out and be very transparent and honest and lets us know that these things really do happen. We really believe, I think, when we have conversations amongst each other, we think, boy, was that really just a Rooney Rule interview or was that a legitimate interview? And you leave some interviews feeling like, you know what, I have a real chance. There's some I've left before and said, boy, I don't really think I have much of a chance here.
You immediately felt some kinship to Brian Flores when he said that the ownership was essentially going to pay him to lose. You felt that way in Cleveland. You weren't directly paid to lose games. You did make a clarification. But did you feel you were essentially set up as a transition coach?
Absolutely. I was part of a plan that did not allow me to be put in a situation to win. And when you look at the parallels between the two situations, that's why I said I experienced some of the things that Brian experienced.
What is the best way to entice the owners to be better?
I think first we have to give the owners the right information. And sometimes people don't want to go back and dig through the history of the National Football League. And I think we have to understand is when the league started, minorities were not a part of the league. And that's where you have to start first and foremost. And you said it. I said it to a committee in Indianapolis when I shared with them that I thought in order to make a real change in this, you really have to dig down deep and understand how the league started, where it is today, why it is where it is today, and get the owners to understand if we really want change, if we're going to talk about diversity and inclusion, and if you're really going to stand behind diversity and inclusion, then you have to really be about it. And so get to know these minority candidates that are out there to give them the best opportunity to move forward. But I don't think those things have ever happened.
Are you going to join the lawsuit? You were going to help out. You were going to provide some evidence. What is your status with the Brian Flores lawsuit?
Well, I think what I'm going to do is whatever Brian needs. What I'm going to do right now is play the part that I need to play. Obviously, there's so many things going on there. I support Brian 100%. He knows that. And so if Brian needs me to be a part of this, he knows I would be. And let me ask you about Division I college football. You could make a case that as bad as the NFL is with diversity in the coaching ranks, it seems to be as bad, if not worse, in the Power 5 conferences, especially for an African-American head coach who gets fired. They don't seem to get a second shot at all in college football comparatively to the NFL. Why do you think that is? I think we're dealing with the same issues in the National Football League and college football. It is no different. And it's probably even bigger in the college football game because there are more opportunities. So I think it's still the fact that there's people saying they want diversity and inclusion, and really we are not really ready for diversity and inclusion. The NBA doesn't have this issue. And I think part of the reason is NBA players speak out. NFL players, a few speak out. But black NFL players collectively, if they wanted to say, hey, the coaching ranks need to diversify, we're not playing, that could change ownership's stance in a hurry. You know, you get the sense the NBA players the NBA knew that could possibly be the case. Do we need more player involvement here? Oh, absolutely we do. The difference between the NBA and the National Football League is their contracts are guaranteed. The NFL contracts are not guaranteed. And I don't think people are going to say things that might jeopardize them. We've seen players and coaches alike get blackballed out of the league. And I think players see that. So they don't want to be first in doing that. I wish they would, especially when the league is 70% minority. But at the same time, I do understand why guys would not step forward and put themselves at risk that way.
Extraordinarily important point that Hugh Jackson made there about guaranteed contracts for football players and why you wonder why some of them don't feel the comfort in speaking out. You can watch our full Hugh Jackson interview, by the way, including a question I posed to him about whether he had a blind spot himself when it came to some of his own hiring practices at Grambling State University. That's at meetthepress.com. Jackson, for what it's worth, continues to defend his hiring of offensive coordinator Art Briles, who had been fired from Baylor following an independent investigation into sexual assault allegations during his tenure there. Briles resigned from the job at Grambling under pressure, outside forces, just days after his hiring was announced. When we come back, our panel dissects what sets the NFL apart from the other sports leagues on diversity issues and how it could eventually address them. Joining me now to discuss the relationship between football and race are Mark Leibovich, he's a staff writer for The Atlantic, author of Big Game, The NFL in Dangerous Times, Jane Costa, columnist for The New York Times and host of The Argument, and Kevin Blackistone, sports columnist for The Washington Post. Let me just start with the point that Hugh Jackson made, Kevin, right there at the end, because it does feel as if the players could make this more uncomfortable for the owners. But then you saw what happened to Colin Kaepernick and the whole guaranteed contract issue. Is that probably the biggest obstacle there is for players forcing a change?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think that's an easy way to look at it. If people always say, what would happen if the players just walked away and forced their hand? But, you know, this is a coach's problem. Why doesn't Hugh Jackson sign up for the Brian Flores suit? Why doesn't Tony Dungy sign up for the Brian Flores lawsuit? Why don't all these guys sign up for the Brian Flores lawsuit? There's nothing stopping them. Mike Tomlin can sign on. You know, one of the things we forget about the concussion lawsuit is that a number of people who signed on to the concussion lawsuit are not players who are suffering the effects of concussions, but players standing up for their fellow teammates. So it would be great if the players do that. The players have much more pressure on them because their careers are so short, and they look at it as a short opportunity to make a lot of money. But I would really ask, as I think you did, of Hugh Jackson, put your name on the line.
Jane?
Yeah, I think that in some ways what's going on in the NFL is a labor issue. And the NFL wisely recognizes that if you are going to attempt to pressure the NFL, that's basically the end of your career. And that comes from the very start of your career in the NFL, whether you get hurt at the combine because you do not have any protections under the CBA, whether that occurs after your career. Because unlike in the NBA, there is no other game in town. There are players who are like, I'll play in Europe. There are players who say that like
you can make a living. Right.
You can make a living in another country doing something.
By the way, baseball too.
Right, you can play in Japan. Yeah. In the NFL, this is it. That's basically it. And so that's why all of the NFL's punishments, I just did a piece about how the NFL treats prospects. And there were a host of incidents in which during the combine, players were asked questions like, is your mother a sex worker or are you gay? Items that under general employment law are verboten. And so,
by the way, every time I do an interview, I get a reminder. I get sent our rules, questions you can't ask.
Right, exactly.
All those would be on there.
Right, and I've talked to employment lawyers, and they're like, this would not be on there, but that would require someone to sue. And the NFL is wisely aware that the lawsuit, by the time you won the lawsuit, you'd be already out of your career. And so the NFL says, don't worry, we'll punish the teams for you. They keep punishments in-house because they know there's nowhere else you can go.
Mark, it does feel as if this league, the owners are more powerful than the league. You go to some things, and even though the owners control the NBA commissioner and the owners control the MLB commissioner, it feels like here it's even more a constraint on the league, is it?
That seems to be. I mean, look, I would not understate the power of owners in the NBA and in Major League Baseball. I mean, we've seen there are any number of examples about that. But in the NFL, you're right. I mean, there is not a single African American owner. There hasn't been. I don't think, has there ever been? I mean, and certainly they could vow to sort of look to, bring.
There's an opening right now. And there's some,
Denver, right?
Yeah. Robert
correct.
Smith is somebody whose name I've heard out there. He's the gentleman that I think bought everybody's college debt off at Morehouse, I remember.
No, but I mean, the coaching numbers, even the GM numbers sort of go up and down. Ownership, it never, ever changes. And there's no one who can seriously say that there'll be a half a dozen black owners in 20 years in the NFL. I mean, that just doesn't happen. The teams don't turn over. But I do think that, look, leverage is a big thing. Well, first of all, representation at the ownership level is everything. Mm-hmm. Roger Goodell, I actually agree with you. I think he's been a pretty lousy commissioner in many ways, but I think his heart is in the right place on this issue, whatever that will get you. I think he was instrumental in at least trying to get Colin Kaepernick a job and at least, doing everything possible to make sure that the Brian Flores situation didn't become a coaching analog to that. What is that going to get you?
I guess one check mark you put is they have diversified NFL officiating. And I say this, right? They've put more women in that place. You certainly see. So where the league has some control, I guess you could say they've made efforts, but they don't challenge the owners.
Well, I mean,
and I guess
the great thing about the Brian Flores lawsuit is that it invokes Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and it's about time that somebody does this. The days of altruism and goodwill, waiting for that to change things, is over. It should have been over years ago, and so. To me, this is the right thing to do. You have to bring legal pressure to bear upon the owners and the commissioner, no matter what we might think of Roger Goodell and where his heart is. They're going to have to produce evidence to show that they've not treated.
This has to go to trial.
It has to go to trial.
Yeah, there cannot be a settlement here.
No, absolutely not. And everything we've heard so far from Brian Flores says that he's not going to settle. He wants to go to trial.
Jane, they're afraid of a trial. Discovery is absolutely
very much
we
so.
know this.
And we've seen this from the NFL with how it's reacted to. I mean, they will slow walk this suit as far as they can.
Concussion lawsuit is the model, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. They will take this as far as they possibly can because the NFL, they're not stupid. They know that this is bad, and especially because at the absolute best argument, and I was thinking about this because back when people were talking about Josh McCown getting the Texans head coaching job, to which I said, Josh McCown.
But he was the quarterback,
he was an active backup quarterback. Yeah. And that's when the moment I was just like, if this isn't included, if Flores' lawsuit just writes itself. And I think that's the moment here in which you're seeing, it's going to go to trial, and it's not going to be good.
Mark, the other issue that you can't help but notice when you do the coaching analysis, it's nepotism. It's a gigantic issue. Right. And again, we talked about things that every other corporation in America wouldn't allow. And I think nepotism is getting in the way of black assistant coaches moving up.
Absolutely. I mean, look, it is part of the same network that has an entrenched system that is incredibly difficult for African American candidates to break into, whether there's nepotism within it or whether it's just the friendships, the relationships that have built up over decades, is another thing. But I think, look, it's part of the same systemic monster that is very, very difficult.
With the ownership are handed down generation to generation. What is it, a third, I think, of the teams, have like second or third generation owners. It's to do it all.
Interesting enough, when Reggie McKenzie was the general manager of the Oakland Raiders, the Raiders slowly but surely had the most black players in the league and the most black coaches on their staff. He got fired. John Gruden comes in with Mayock as the GM, and now we have the Brian Flores lawsuit.
Don't think that's just a coincidence. Anyway, Kevin Blackstone, Jane Coaston, Mark Leibovich, good to see you guys. And that's all we have for this episode of Meet the Press Reports. Join us next week as we explore the tension between U.S. energy dependence and the ongoing fight against climate change. We're going to take a closer look at the American cities still trying to make carbon neutrality a reality and the European capital that's leading the way. And, of course, we'll see you this Sunday on Meet the Press.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.